My phone rang at 11 p.m. "We found your wife," the officer said. "We need you to come identify her." It had only been 3 days since we lost our baby. 3 days since Claire stopped speaking above a whisper. Since I started sleeping with one hand on her back just to feel her breathing. I told him that's impossible, she's right here beside me. He went quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Sir, the woman we found has your wife's exact face." I walked down the hallway, hand shaking on the doorknob, not ready for what waited on the other side. This story starts quietly, but won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. Have you ever felt something was off about someone close to you, even when you couldn't explain why? Yes or no? Your perspective might be what someone else needs today. Quick note. Some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the message this carries. The phone buzzed at 11:04 p.m. on a Tuesday night, 3 days after we lost the baby. I'd run my family's auto repair garage on the east side of Houston for 15 years, hands perpetually stained with grease despite the best efforts of industrial soap. And I knew the difference between routine calls and the kind that changed everything. This wasn't routine. "Mr. Garrett?" The voice was male, professional, careful. "This is Detective Corbin Ramsey with Harris County Sheriff's Department. We found your wife, Margot Garrett. She's at Memorial Hermann Hospital. We need you to come identify her." The room tilted. Margot lay sleeping beside me, her face pale in the dim light from the street, still recovering from the miscarriage that had devastated us both 3 days earlier. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady. "That's not possible," I said, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake her. "My wife is asleep right next to me." Silence on the line. Not confusion, calculation. "Sir, I need you to listen carefully. The woman here at Memorial Hermann has your wife's driver's license, her insurance card, and when we asked her what happened, she told us she just lost a pregnancy 3 days ago. Everything matches, Mr. Garrett." My grip tightened on the phone. "There's been a mistake. Someone stole her purse, her ID. She knew your address, your anniversary, the name of your garage. And when we asked her name, she said Margot Caldwell Garrett without hesitation. Caldwell, her maiden name, the one only family used. How do you prove your own life is real when someone official tells you it isn't?" "Detective," I said, my free hand already reaching toward Margot in the dark. "I'm looking at her right now. She's breathing. She never left this house." "Sir, describe what you're seeing." The request landed strange, like he was testing me. My palm found her shoulder through the gray sleep shirt she'd worn for years, the fabric soft and familiar. She was warm, real. I traced the outline of her in the darkness, lying on her right side as she always did, knees drawn up slightly, one hand tucked under the pillow. "Gray shirt," I said, cataloging proof. "Lying on her right side. There's a scar on her left wrist from when she was 8. Fell off a bike." I could see it even in the dim light, a pale line she'd traced for me 100 times while telling the story. "My wife is here, Detective. I don't know who you found, but it's not Margot." The detective's voice dropped lower. "Mr. Garrett, the woman we found was disoriented, confused. She'd been wandering near the medical center. We only picked her up because she walked into traffic. When we searched her, she had your wife's wallet, your wife's phone, and she knew things, personal things. Then someone's impersonating her. Identity theft happens. That's what I thought." He paused, and I heard something shift in his tone, something that made my stomach tighten. Until I saw her face. 3 seconds of silence. 3 seconds that would crack open a secret I didn't know existed. "What does that mean?" I asked, Detective Corbin Ramsey had worked missing persons for Harris County long enough to know when something didn't add up, and I could hear in his voice that this case set every instinct on edge. Mr. Garrett, I need you to listen carefully. The woman here, she has your wife's face. Not similar, not close, identical. The word hung in the air like smoke. I don't understand, I said. But my hand had gone still on Margot's shoulder, and I did understand. Understood that reality was bending, that something impossible was forcing its way into my ordinary life, that the detective on the phone was asking me to believe in duplicates. What are you saying? The question came out hollow. I'm saying you need to come to the hospital right now, because I don't know which one is really your wife. Margot shifted in her sleep, rolling slightly toward me, and I pulled my hand back like I'd touched fire. Her face, the one I'd kissed 1,000 times, the one that had cried into my shoulder 3 nights ago when the bleeding started, looked exactly the same as it always had. Familiar, known, mine. But somewhere across Houston, in a hospital room under fluorescent lights, someone else wore that face too. Mr. Garrett, are you there? How is that possible? My voice came out strange, detached. I don't know. But I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Twin, maybe. Sister. I don't know. But she's got your wife's face, your wife's ID, and your wife's recent medical history. So either you drive down here right now, or I'm driving to your house. Because one way or another, we're figuring out what the hell's happening. My hand was still on her shoulder, but suddenly I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The room felt smaller. The air felt thicker. Margot's breathing continued, steady and real, but the word identical kept echoing in my skull. I'd known this woman for 12 years, married her, built a life with her, tried to start a family with her. I knew the way she took her coffee, the songs she hummed in the shower, the exact tone of her laugh when something surprised her. Didn't I? I'll be there in 20 minutes, I heard myself say. Don't wake your wife, the detective said, and the instruction felt obscene. Not yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with. The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of our bedroom, phone cooling in my hand, staring at the woman I'd slept beside for 12 years. The detective's words hung in the air like a diagnosis I couldn't process. My wife was here, breathing beside me, real and warm under my hand. But someone else, somewhere across Houston, wore her face. I hung up without answering, heart hammering, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, I stared at the woman next to me and felt the cold edge of doubt. I grabbed my keys without turning on the light. One last glance at the sleeping form in our bed before I walked out of the bedroom into a night that would crack our lives in half. The doubt stayed with me like a passenger. I didn't wake her. The detective had said not to, and some part of me, a part I hated, agreed. Better to verify the impossibility first. Better to confirm that reality still worked the way it was supposed to before disturbing the woman who'd cried herself to sleep in my arms every night since we'd lost the baby. 3 days. It had only been 3 days. The highway stretched empty at midnight, streetlights painting the asphalt orange. I-10 toward the medical center cut through Houston like a vein, and I followed it with my hands tight on the wheel, mind cycling through explanations that all dissolved under examination. Identity theft. Coincidence. Someone who looked similar enough to fool a tired detective in bad lighting, but he'd said identical. I'd known Margot for 12 years, married her against her parents' wishes. Vernon and Phyllis Cole had made it clear that a garage mechanic with perpetual grease under his fingernails wasn't their vision for their only daughter's future. Vernon's voice last week still echoed, "You take care of our daughter, Bryce," like I needed reminding she came from money and I came from oil changes. But I knew her. I knew the sound of her breathing in sleep. I knew which hip she favored when she was tired. I knew the small rituals nobody else would notice. How she double-checked the stove twice before bed. The way she always parked the car nose out in the driveway. Didn't I? When did I start questioning reality? Was it the phone call, or was it earlier? Her wrong smile after we lost the baby. The way she'd touched my shoulder like she was learning the gesture. The thought made me sick. 40 minutes through empty streets. 40 minutes of my own heartbeat counting down to something I couldn't name. The medical center rose against the night sky, all glass and light, and the humming machinery of healing. And I pulled into Memorial Herman's emergency lot at 12:43 a.m., feeling like I was driving toward the edge of the world. The fluorescent brightness inside hit me like a wall. Hospitals at night had their own atmosphere. Hushed urgency, the smell of antiseptic and fear, the shuffle of exhausted staff moving between crises. A nurse glanced up as I entered, started to ask if I needed help, then looked past me as Detective Ramsey appeared from a side corridor. I was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 38, with the kind of exhausted eyes that came from seeing too much, and the careful movements of someone trained not to escalate. His badge hung from his belt, and he carried himself with the deliberate calm of a man who'd delivered bad news before. "Mr. Garrett," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, assessing. "I know how this sounds, but I need you to prepare yourself for what you're about to see." "My wife is home asleep," I said, and heard how automatic it sounded. Professional denial. "This is some kind of mistake. Identity theft, maybe. Someone who looks similar." Ramsey's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or recognition of a man about to have his certainty shattered. "Mr. Garrett," he said quietly, "it's not similar. Follow me." We walked through corridors that all looked the same, past waiting rooms with scattered families and the distant beep of monitors. Ramsey explained as we moved. The woman had been found near Herman Park around 10 p.m., disoriented, walking into traffic. Patrol picked her up, brought her in for evaluation. When they searched her, she had a wallet with Margot's driver's license, insurance card, credit cards. When they asked her name, she said Margot Caldwell Garrett, without hesitation. When they asked what happened, she mentioned the miscarriage. "How would she know that?" I asked, voice tight. "That's what we need to find out," Ramsey said. "But Mr. Garrett, before we go in there, I need you to understand something. I've been doing this job for 12 years. Missing persons, identity cases, fraud. I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen this." He stopped outside a door marked Private Consultation 3. His hand rested on the handle, the detective's hand on the door handle. 3 seconds of pause. Then he pushed it open. The woman sitting under fluorescent hospital lights looked exactly like my wife. Not similar, not close, exactly. Same bone structure, same eyes, but thinner, hungrier, with Margot's face worn by a completely different life. Her hair was cut roughly, shorter than Margot wore it, and her clothes were cheaper, wrong. A faded jacket, jeans with frayed hems, shoes that had walked harder miles than my wife had ever known. But the face was perfect. She looked up as we entered, and I watched something flicker across her features. Recognition. Longing. Something calculated and desperate all at once. Like she'd been waiting for this exact moment and was terrified it wouldn't go as planned. "You," she whispered, voice cracking. "You're really here." I couldn't speak. 12 years of knowing every detail of my wife's face, and now it stared back at me from a complete stranger. "Ma'am," Detective Ramsey said carefully, "this is Bryce Garrett. You claim to be his wife. Can you explain that? Her eyes never left mine. They were Margot's eyes. Same color, same shape, but they held something different. Something raw and hungry that my wife had never worn. She looked at me like I was water, and she was dying of thirst, like I was the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. Bryce, she said, and hearing my name in that voice, Margot's voice but wrong, desperate, made my skin crawl. It's me. It's really me. Who are you? I managed. Her face crumpled. Not the way Margot cried. I knew those tears. I'd held her through them 3 nights ago, but with a different kind of breaking. Something that had been held together by will and was finally fracturing. You don't recognize me? She whispered, and the way she said it made my blood run cold, because it wasn't a question about identity. It was an accusation, like I'd forgotten something I was supposed to remember. The accusation in her voice followed me out of that hospital room like a ghost. Detective Ramsey drove me to the Harris County Sheriff's Department at 1:30 a.m. while the woman who wore my wife's face waited in a secured room. Her identification spread across a metal table like evidence at a crime scene. We're bringing her in for psychiatric evaluation, Ramsey explained as we pulled onto the empty highway, red and blue lights from his unmarked sedan reflecting off wet asphalt. Standard procedure when someone's found disoriented with questionable identity. Except her identity isn't questionable. That's the problem. I don't understand, I said, though I was starting to. Understanding was creeping in like cold water, filling spaces I didn't know were empty. We brought her here because nothing about her story makes sense, but everything about her paperwork does, Ramsey said. When someone shows up with fake documents, there are tells, wrong fonts, bad lamination, database mismatches. This woman has none of that. What does that mean? Either she's lying or she's not. Ramsey's hands tightened on the wheel. That's what I need you to help me figure out. Because what I'm about to show you shouldn't exist. The sheriff's department building rose against the night sky like a concrete monument to order, all harsh angles and security lights. Ramsey led me through empty corridors that smelled of industrial cleaner and old coffee, past holding cells and processing stations, to a small interview room where fluorescent lights made everything look sick and too real. The documents were already laid out, each one in a clear plastic evidence sleeve. The detective gestured for me to sit, then began pointing to them one by one with the careful precision of a man building a case. Driver's license, he said, sliding the first sleeve toward me. Issued 2019. Texas Department of Public Safety confirms it's legitimate, not a forgery. Photo matches the woman we found. I stared at the license. Margot's face looked back at me. Except it wasn't quite Margot's face, was it? Thinner, harder, the same bones arranged into a different life. Insurance card, Ramsey continued. Active and current. Policy's been in effect since 2020. Social Security Administration confirms this number has been active since 1986. That's impossible, I said, voice hollow. My wife has that Social Security number. She's had it her whole life. Mr. Garrett, Ramsey said quietly. So does she. Every database I can access says this number belongs to Margot Caldwell Garrett, born April 1986. Current address matches yours. Employer history checks out. And then there's this. He slid another sleeve across the table. Medical records. Memorial Hermann Hospital letterhead. Familiar because I'd seen the real ones just yesterday when I'd signed the discharge paperwork after the miscarriage. How do you prove you're married to someone when another person has documented proof they're the same person? Miscarriage, Ramsey said, tapping the record. 72 hours ago. Same hospital where you said your wife was treated. She was treated there, I said. I was with her. I held her hand through the whole thing. I believe you. But look at this. Same date, same attending physician, same procedure code. According to the hospital's records, according to the insurance company's records, according to the state of Texas, this woman had the exact same medical event at the exact same time as your wife. My hands felt numb. I picked up the medical record, feeling the slick plastic sleeve, reading words that were simultaneously true and impossible. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the physician who'd been kind to Margot, who'd explained gently what was happening. The same name appeared on these records. I ran fingerprints, Ramsey said. Standard procedure for unidentified persons. The prints came back with a match in the system. Driver's license database. Background check from when she applied for a nursing license in 2015. A nursing license? Margot Caldwell Garrett, registered nurse. License active until 2018 when she let it lapse. He paused. Does your wife have a nursing license? No. She works. She worked in event planning before we decided to try for a baby. My own words sounded distant, like someone else was speaking them. Same doctor, same procedure code, same woman, according to the hospital's records, the insurance company's records, the state of Texas. Detective, I said slowly, what are you telling me? Ramsey leaned back in his chair, exhaustion written across his face. In cases like this, there are usually 3 explanations. The first is identity theft. So elaborate it started years ago, with someone systematically building a parallel identity. But that doesn't explain the physical similarity. You saw her face. The second is some kind of administrative error, a duplicate record created by mistake. But 6 different databases all confirming the same information? That's not a mistake. He paused, letting me arrive at the third explanation on my own. The third, he said carefully, is an identical twin that nobody told you about. The words landed like a physical blow. My wife doesn't have a twin, I said automatically. She's an only child. Her parents made that very clear. But even as I said it, I was remembering. Vernon Caldwell's voice at every family dinner, every holiday, every stilted gathering where I felt like grease under their manicured fingernails. Our daughter, our only daughter. Said it like a point of pride, like an emphasis, like he was reminding someone. Me? Margot? Himself? Phyllis's careful control whenever anyone mentioned family. The way she'd change the subject if conversation drifted toward childhood stories that went back too far. The Caldwell family trust that was set to transfer to Margot alone on her 40th birthday. No siblings to split with, no other heirs to consider. Unless, I heard myself say, unless they lied. Ramsey said nothing. He didn't need to. Does my wife have a twin? I asked, the question forming ice in my gut. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. The documents sat between us like evidence of a crime that had been committed before I was even born. I think, Ramsey said quietly, that's a question for your in-laws. Detective Ramsey slid his phone across the table. Recording app already open. Red dot pulsing. My finger hesitated over Vernon Caldwell's number for 3 seconds before I pressed call, knowing that whatever his answer, my marriage would never be the same. The phone rang once, twice. On the 4th ring, Vernon Caldwell answered with the clipped tone of a man who'd spent 40 years giving orders in boardrooms, not receiving midnight calls from his mechanic's son-in-law. Bryce? Do you have any idea what time it is? Does Margot have a twin sister? I asked. No preamble, no apology. Just the question that was rewriting my entire reality. Yes or no, Vernon? The response came too fast. No, of course not. Our daughter is an only child. Why would you? Then silence. Not the silence of confusion or surprise. The silence of calculation. 5 full seconds where I could hear Vernon breathing, could almost hear the wheels turning as he decided what lie would hold longest. "Where are you calling from?" he finally asked. Voice changed. "Careful now. Lawyer careful." Detective Ramsey leaned forward, recognition in his eyes. He'd heard that pause before, in interrogation rooms, from people caught between truth and survival. "Harris County Sheriff's Department," I said. "There's a woman here who has Margot's face. Her exact face, Vernon. And she has Margot's identification. So I'm asking you again, does my wife have a twin sister?" I heard movement on the other end. A hand over the phone, urgent whispering. Vernon's voice muffled but sharp. Then a woman's higher pitch responding. The sound of the phone changing hands. "Bryce." Phyllis Caldwell's voice came through, trembling despite her attempt at control. At 63, she'd always maintained the polished appearance of Houston society. Hair perfect, composure absolute. But her voice was cracking now. "What is this about? Why are you calling at this ungodly hour?" "There's a woman here," I said slowly, watching Ramsey's face as he listened. "At the Harris County Sheriff's Department. She has Margot's face, Margot's ID, everything. Medical records from 3 days ago. The same miscarriage. Everything matches. The police want to know if my wife has a twin." Phyllis's breathing became audible through the line. Rapid, shallow, the sound of panic barely contained. We don't. You need to stop asking these questions right now." "Why?" I pressed. "If it's not true, just say it's not true. Tell me Margot is an only child like you've always said." She is an only child. But the words came out wrong. Not confident. Desperate. How long had they practiced that lie? Our only daughter. Until it became reflex. Until they almost believed it themselves. "Phyllis," I said, and heard my own voice go cold. "There's a woman sitting in a secured room 20 feet from me right now who looks exactly like your daughter." The detective ran her fingerprints. They match a Margot Caldwell Garrett, who's had a social security number since 1986, the same year your daughter was born. So either you're about to explain something I can't begin to understand, or I'm going to assume you've been lying to me, to Margot, for 40 years. Silence. Then Phyllis's voice, barely a whisper. Who told you about? She stopped, caught herself, but too late. "About what?" I demanded. "About the daughter you gave away? About the twin sister Margot doesn't know exists?" "You don't understand," Phyllis said, crying now. "We were young. We weren't married yet. Vernon's father would have. The family would have. We couldn't keep both of them. We had to choose." "Jesus Christ," I breathed. Detective Ramsey was writing rapidly, underlining words. "We gave her the best life we could," Phyllis continued, words tumbling out in a rush now that the dam had broken. "Margot had everything. Education, opportunity, love. We did what we thought was right. There are things you don't understand about our family." Vernon's voice cut through the background, sharp as a blade. "Phyllis, hang up the phone." Vernon, he already knows. "Hang up the phone, now." The click of the disconnected line. Vernon's control asserting itself even as his wife's composure shattered. I stared at Ramsey's phone, the recording still running, capturing the silence where Vernon and Phyllis Caldwell's 40-year secret had just exploded. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Every word," Ramsey said, already rewinding. He played back Phyllis's voice. "We couldn't keep both of them. We had to choose. They gave away a baby," I said, the words tasting wrong. "They had twins, and they just chose one." "Happens more than you'd think," Ramsey said quietly. 1980s, unwed pregnancy, wealthy family, societal pressure. One baby they could explain away as premature, married quickly to save face. But twins, that's harder to hide. So they picked Margot and gave away the other one. My hands felt numb. And never told her. Never told anyone. Question is, Ramsey said, does the other one know? Did she grow up knowing she had a twin sister living the life she could have had? Because if she did, I didn't need to finish. I could see it in his face, the same thought crystallizing in my own mind. The timing, I said. 3 days after the miscarriage, when Margot is most vulnerable, most fragile, the woman shows up with perfect documentation, ready to, what? Replace her? We need to talk to that woman again, Ramsey said. And this time, we're asking about her childhood, about who raised her, about how long she's known your wife existed. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Is Margot okay? You left so fast. M. I showed Ramsey the screen. From the woman at your house? He asked. Has to be. I took my phone. She must have... I stopped. She must have my number memorized. Of course she does. It's her husband's number too, isn't it? Ramsey's expression went grim. Mr. Garrett, I think you need to go home. And I think you need to look very carefully at the woman in your bed. Dawn broke over Houston as I drove home to a woman whose face I'd memorized for 12 years, knowing that when I looked at her this time, I might be looking at a stranger. The detective's words followed me through empty streets. Look very carefully. At what? At the person I'd slept beside for 12 years, whose breathing I knew in the dark, whose habits and rhythms had become the background music of my life. I was supposed to look at her and see, what? Evidence of deception? Proof that the woman I loved had been replaced? Except I already knew. Phyllis's broken voice on the phone had confirmed it. We couldn't keep both of them. 2 daughters. Twin daughters. One they kept, one they gave away. And now that abandoned daughter had come home. I pulled into our driveway at 4 a.m., headlights washing over the house that suddenly felt foreign. My truck sat there in the dark for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, while I stared at the bedroom window and tried to remember when things had felt wrong. 3 days ago. The miscarriage. The way she'd looked at me afterward. Something off in her eyes. Like she was performing grief rather than feeling it. Or was I inventing suspicion now that I knew to look for it? I got out of the truck. The front door was still unlocked. I'd left in such a rush I hadn't even grabbed my keys. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it hours ago. Her coffee mug still on the counter, half full and cold. Her shoes by the door, the brown flats she wore everywhere. Size 7. Margot wore size 7, but so would her identical twin. How well do you really know someone? Well enough to spot an identical twin living your life? I walked through rooms. I'd walked through 1,000 times. But now every familiar object felt like a prop in a stage play. The Afghan on the couch. Had she folded it that way this morning? Or had the real Margot folded it days ago before the switch? The mail on the counter? Whose handwriting addressed those envelopes? The detective's warning echoed. Look for details, small things that don't match. But what if the twin had been studying those details for months? Years? What if she knew Margot's life better than Margot knew it herself? I reached the bedroom door. Gray light was seeping through the curtains. That colorless pre-dawn glow that made everything look washed out and temporary. I could hear her breathing from the hallway. Steady, deep, the rhythm of sleep. She was lying on her right side, facing away from the door, exactly as Margot always slept. Dark hair spread across the pillow, one hand tucked under her cheek, the curve of her shoulder visible above the blanket. I stepped closer. Every detail cataloging itself in my mind with new paranoia. Same cheekbone, same curve of shoulder, same rhythm of breathing, or close enough that I wouldn't notice if I wasn't looking. Marriage is built on 1,000 tiny recognitions. The way she breathes, moves, exists in space. And now each one felt like sand shifting under my feet. When had the switch happened? The miscarriage was 3 days ago. Had she been the one in the hospital bed? Or had that been my real wife? Had I held the imposter's hand through our loss? Or had the real Margot suffered alone while her twin studied her grief to replicate it later? 3 days ago, she'd gone quiet in a way that terrified me. I'd attributed it to trauma, to the physical and emotional devastation of losing the baby we'd wanted so desperately. But what if it had been something else? What if it had been a stranger learning to inhabit my wife's silences? I moved closer to the bed. She didn't stir. In sleep, her face looked peaceful, unguarded. I studied her features in the growing light. The small mole near her left ear, the way her eyebrows had that slight arch, the shape of her lips. All Margot, all perfect, except the thought hit me like cold water, the scar. Margot had a scar on her left wrist, small and faded white, shaped like a comma. She'd shown it to me on our 3rd date, laughing, telling me about falling off her bike at 8 years old, trying to impress neighborhood boys. I'd kissed it that night, traced it with my thumb, memorized it along with everything else about her body. I leaned closer, pulse hammering. The woman's left arm was draped across the pillow, wrist exposed in the gray light, smooth skin. I could see it clearly now as dawn strengthened. The delicate bones of her wrist, the blue veins underneath, the pale flesh unmarked and perfect, smooth skin where the scar should be. 12 years of marriage to a woman with that scar, and the woman in my bed had never fallen off a bike. My hand was shaking as I reached out, gently turning her wrist to examine it more closely. Maybe the light was wrong. Maybe the scar had faded more than I remembered. Maybe no scar, not faded, gone, had never existed on this woman's body. She stirred slightly in her sleep, a small sound in her throat, and I froze. If she woke now, if she opened her eyes and saw me standing over her examining her wrist like evidence at a crime scene. But she settled back into deeper sleep, breathing evening out again. I backed away from the bed, each step careful and deliberate, afraid to make a sound. My pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my skull. The woman who'd been sleeping beside me, wearing my wife's face, sleeping in my wife's spot, answering to my wife's name. She wasn't Margot, had never been Margot, the twin sister at the police station, the one who'd looked at me with desperate recognition and asked, "You don't recognize me?" That had been my wife, confused, disoriented, carrying identification because someone had given it to her, crying because I'd looked at her like a stranger. And I'd left her there, left her in a secured room at the sheriff's department while I came home to the imposter who'd stolen her life. How long had this woman been here? Days? Weeks? And where, God, where was my real wife? I pretended to wake up at 7 a.m. beside a woman wearing my wife's face, knowing that every word, every gesture from this moment forward would be performance, hers and mine. I hadn't slept. The hours between discovering the missing scar and dawn had stretched endless, lying rigid beside the imposter, cataloging every movement for evidence of deception. Now morning light filtered through the curtains, and I had to act like nothing had changed. I shifted, faking the slow stretch of someone emerging from rest. She stirred, rolling toward me with the practiced yawn. "Morning," she said, voice rough with sleep. Margot's voice. Almost. The inflection was slightly wrong. like someone who'd learned the melody but missed the rhythm. "Did you sleep okay? You came to bed so late." Testing. She was testing whether I'd noticed anything. "Work stuff," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Had to help a customer with an emergency tow." The lie came easier than it should have. But everything was lies now. The marriage I thought I had. The woman I thought I knew. She sat up, stretching arms above her head in a gesture I'd seen Margot make 1,000 times. But watching it now, I saw the small differences, the angle of her elbows, the way her shoulders moved, close enough to fool someone not looking for deception. "You work too hard," she said, swinging legs out of bed. The gray sleep shirt was Margot's, and seeing it on this stranger made my stomach turn. "I'll make coffee." She paused at the bedroom door, looked back with something I couldn't quite read. "Want some?" How long can two people pretend to be something they're not? Sharing coffee and lies across the same kitchen table. "Yeah," I said. "I'll be down in a minute." I waited until her footsteps faded, then grabbed my phone. No messages from Detective Ramsey. The woman at this police station, my real wife, God. My actual wife, confused and alone. What had they told her? Did she know I'd gone home to the imposter? I followed the smell of brewing coffee downstairs. She was humming, some tune I didn't recognize, and Margot had hummed the same 3 Beatles tracks for 12 years. This melody was unfamiliar, slipping out unconsciously. I watched from the doorway as she pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet, poured coffee, then reached for the sugar bowl. 2 spoonfuls, stirred carefully, lifted the cup to smell it with satisfaction. My chest went tight. Margot had drunk her coffee black since college. Used to joke that people who ruined coffee with sugar were drinking dessert, not coffee. 12 years of shared mornings, 12 years of knowing this one simple detail. And the woman making coffee with 2 sugars thought I wouldn't notice. "Want me to make you some eggs?" she asked, still not turning. "I'm actually feeling hungry this morning. As if yesterday's grief over losing our baby would just evaporate overnight. The real Margot hadn't eaten breakfast in days, could barely keep down toast. But this woman was hungry, cheerful, humming unfamiliar songs. "No thanks," I managed. "Just coffee." She turned, handing me a mug, black the way I took it, and I watched her sip from her own sweetened cup. She smiled, and I realized I was staring. Not just looking, staring with the intensity of someone searching for cracks in a mask. "What?" she asked, smile faltering. I blinked, tried to soften my expression. "Nothing, sorry," but I couldn't look away. Her hands wrapped around the mug. Were they the right size? Her shoulders in this morning light. Same slope as Margot's, or different? The way she held her weight on her left hip. Familiar or performance? 12 years of black coffee. 12 years of knowing this small detail. "Bryce," she said, setting her mug down with a soft clink. Nervous laugh, forced lightness. "Why are you looking at me like that? You're making me self-conscious." I could see the calculation behind her eyes. The assessment. She was reading my face the same way I was reading hers, both of us searching for evidence of suspicion. "Sorry," I said, manufacturing a tired smile. "Just worried about you. After everything that happened." Her expression softened. If she was faking vulnerability, she was good at it. "I know," she said quietly. "It's been awful, but I'm okay. We're going to be okay. Together." She reached across the counter, laid her hand over mine. Smooth skin where Margot's small scar should have been. The touch felt like electricity, wrong and dangerous, but I didn't pull away. Couldn't pull away without revealing that I knew. "Together," I echoed, the word tasting like ash, her eyes on mine, calculating, suspicious. She knew I was watching. The question was whether she knew why. She withdrew her hand, picked up her coffee again, took another sip of the sweetened lie. "You should get ready for work," she said. "I know Mondays are busy at the garage." How did she know what days were busy? Had she been watching that long? Learning our routines, our rhythms, the patterns of our lives? Or had someone told her, Vernon? Phyllis? The parents who'd given her away, now somehow complicit in this switch? "Yeah," I said. "I should," but I didn't move. We stood there in the kitchen, coffee cups between us like weapons, each watching the other with new wariness. The morning light made everything too bright, too clear, exposing the performance we were both maintaining. She smiled at me again, but something had shifted behind her eyes. A new caution, a recognition that I was studying her too closely. If she suspected I knew the truth, what would she do? Call whoever was helping her? Disappear? Do something worse and more terrifying? Where was my real wife while I stood here drinking coffee with the woman who'd stolen her life? I told her I had to handle an urgent repair at the garage, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, walking out the door felt like escape rather than leaving. She'd bought the lie, or pretended to. Hard to tell anymore which performance was hers and which was mine. The suspicious look from the kitchen had faded when I mentioned a customer with a broken-down truck on I-10, replaced by wifely concern about me working too hard. The mask slipping back into place. I drove straight to downtown Houston, to the glass tower that housed Barker and Associates, the Caldwell family attorney. I'd met Terrence Barker exactly once, at our wedding 12 years ago, where he'd given a polite toast and looked at me like I was a temporary inconvenience in Margot's otherwise carefully planned life. The law firm occupied the 14th floor, all dark wood and leather furniture that smelled like old money and exclusion. The receptionist called back, and within minutes I was being led down a corridor lined with oil paintings of Houston's founding families. Terrence Barker met me at his office door. 52 years old, silver hair perfectly cut, handshake firm and assessing. He'd managed the Caldwell Family Trust for 20 years, and the surprise on his face at seeing me was barely concealed. "Mr. Garrett," he said, stepping back to let me in. "This is unexpected. Is Margot all right?" After this morning's call, I was concerned. Every sense went on alert. "This morning's call?" "Yes, about the trust transfer. But please sit. What brings you here?" I sat in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, mind racing. She'd called him. The imposter had called Margot's lawyer this morning, right after I'd left for the hospital, right after our tense coffee performance. "I wanted to discuss Margot's financial arrangements," I said carefully. "After the miscarriage, I'm trying to make sure everything is in order, protected." How many secrets had Vernon and Phyllis kept from the grease-stained mechanic who married their daughter? Barker nodded, pulled the file from his drawer. "Of course. The Caldwell Trust, as you know, transfers full control to Margot on her 40th birthday, 28 days from now, as I know." I knew nothing. 12 years of marriage and I'd never heard about this trust. But I couldn't let him see that. 4.2 million, I said, like I'd known all along. "And full control means complete discretion over principal and income," Barker explained, opening the file to show me documents I'd never been shown before. Her parents established this when she was born. Standard wealthy family structure. Trust managed by trustees until the beneficiary reaches maturity. In this case, age 40. At that point, their conditions expire. The money becomes entirely hers to manage, spend, invest as she sees fit. I stared at the numbers on the page. $4.2 million. Vernon and Phyllis had set up a fortune for their daughter, structured it so carefully that even her husband of 12 years knew nothing about it. Structured it to bypass me entirely, going straight from their control to hers, because they never trusted me with it. Never thought the garage mechanic belonged anywhere near their family's wealth. The transfer happens automatically? I asked. On her birthday, yes. February 23rd. We'll need her to come in for some paperwork, identity verification, signature on the final documents. But the trust itself transfers at midnight on the date. He paused. Which is why this morning's call was so unusual. What exactly did my wife say when she called? Barker's expression shifted. Professional concern. She asked if we could expedite the transfer, complete it before the birthday deadline. I explained that's not how trusts work. There are legal timelines, verification processes. But she seemed unusually insistent. Her voice sounded strained, unlike her usual composed self. My hands tightened on the arms of the chair. The imposter had called at 8 a.m., right after our kitchen encounter, while I was supposedly at the garage, trying to accelerate the money transfer, trying to get her hands on $4.2 million before anyone discovered the switch, because she knows she only has weeks before Vernon and Phyllis expose her. Before I figure it out, she's trying to grab the money and run. Did she say why she wanted to expedite? I asked. Something about recent stress, wanting to get financial matters settled after the miscarriage. Which isn't like Margot. She's always been very measured about the trust. Barker leaned forward. Mr. Garrett, is everything all right? Your wife seemed not herself this morning. Not herself. The truth buried in professional euphemism. She's been through a lot, I said. The miscarriage was devastating. Maybe she's just trying to feel in control of something. Barker nodded, but I could see doubt lingering in his eyes. Of course, but I'd like to speak with her again before we proceed with any modifications to the standard process. Perhaps you could have her call me? Or better yet, come in together. I'll talk to her, I said, standing. Thank you for your time. 28 days. The imposter had 28 days to steal everything, identity, inheritance, life, before the trust transferred and questions started. His handshake at the door was firmer this time. Mr. Garrett, if there's anything concerning you about Margot's recent behavior, anything at all, I hope you know you can speak confidentially. I met his eyes. He knew something was wrong, could sense it in her voice, in my sudden visit, in the wrongness emanating from a situation that should be routine. I appreciate that, I said, but I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until I knew where my real wife was. Not until I had proof solid enough to survive the Caldwell's lawyers and money and 40 years of buried secrets. I rode the elevator down 14 floors, understanding the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just about a hidden twin sister. It was a calculated heist. The imposter had targeted Margot's life with precision. Wait until she's vulnerable from miscarriage, make the switch, grab the money in 28 days, and disappear. And somewhere in Houston, my real wife was being held prisoner while her double tried to rob her of everything. I lay beside her in the dark for 43 minutes, counting her breaths, waiting for sleep to take her deep enough that I could steal the proof I needed. The entire day had been performance. Breakfast together. She'd made eggs. I'd forced them down while discussing weather and garage appointments like we were normal. Lunch she'd brought to the shop, surprising me with sandwiches and a kiss on the cheek that made my skin crawl. Dinner we'd cooked together, her humming that wrong melody while chopping vegetables, me responding to questions about my day with fabricated stories. Every word a lie, every gesture theater. By the time we'd brushed our teeth side by side at the bathroom sink, Her mentioning something mundane about needing to buy milk. I'd felt like my skull was splitting from the effort of pretending. Now she lay beside me in the dark, breathing evening out into the deeper rhythm of sleep. I watched the digital clock, 11:37, 11:38, counted her breaths, watched for the small twitches that meant REM sleep, the point where waking would be harder, where she'd be lost enough in dreams not to hear me move. 43 minutes of shallow breathing, light sleep. 44. Now, a full day of lies, and now, stealing evidence from a sleeping stranger. I slipped from the bed, with the practiced silence of years spent leaving early for garage shifts, not wanting to wake Margot, the real Margot, on cold mornings. My feet found the floor without sound. The hallway stretched dark toward the bathroom. In my pocket, the small plastic evidence bag Detective Ramsey had given me yesterday felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Get me DNA," he'd said. "Hair with follicles, or something with saliva. We'll compare it to Margot's medical records. Scientific proof." The bathroom tile was cold under my feet. I closed the door most of the way, left it cracked so the click of the latch wouldn't wake her. Moonlight through the small window gave just enough light to see. Her hairbrush sat on the counter. Dark strands tangled in the bristles. Margot's hair color. Margot's length, but belonging to someone else entirely. I pulled the evidence bag from my pocket, carefully extracted 3 long strands. The detective had been specific. 3 minimum for viable comparison. Make sure the follicles are attached. That's where the DNA is cleanest. I held them up to the moonlight. Small white bulbs at the root of each strand. Follicles intact. Sealed the bag. Pressed the closure tight. This small plastic rectangle would prove scientifically what I already knew. That the woman in my bed wasn't my wife. That somewhere in Houston, the real Margot was being held prisoner. That everything about my life for the past week had been a calculated lie. DNA evidence. The one thing that couldn't lie, couldn't perform, couldn't pretend to be someone else. 48 hours. The detective had said results would take 48 hours. 2 days while I maintained this charade, while I shared space with a stranger, while my real wife was God knows where suffering God knows what. I tucked the bag deep into my pocket and turned to go back to bed. Then I saw her arm. She'd shifted in sleep, rolling onto her back, left arm flung out across my pillow. The moonlight coming through our bedroom window caught her wrist, and I froze in the bathroom doorway. Bruises, faint purple-yellow marks circling her wrist in a distinct ring pattern. I'd seen marks like that before. Guys who'd been arrested, brought into the garage the next day, with cuffs, bruises still visible. Circumferential contusions. Rope burns, restraint marks. I moved closer, barely breathing. The bruises were fading, but still clear enough to read the pattern. Something had been wrapped around her wrist, tight enough to leave deep tissue damage, long enough for the marks to set in. Not fresh, not old, maybe 5-6 days. My stomach dropped. Bruises fade from purple to yellow in specific timeline. These were maybe 5-6 days old. Right around the time the switch had happened, my mind raced through possibilities. Had someone forced her to do this? Was she being coerced, threatened, controlled by whoever had orchestrated this identity theft? The bruises suggested captivity, violence, someone else pulling strings, or these were marks from restraining my wife, from tying Margot up somewhere while this double stole her life, from the physical act of kidnapping and imprisonment. I stared at that wrist, at the evidence of violence that could mean 2 completely different stories, victim or perpetrator, forced accomplice or cruel architect. Either way, brutality sat at the center of this. Either way, someone had been hurt. I needed to know which. The woman in my bed, was she suffering too? Had someone discovered she was Margot's abandoned twin and weaponized her resentment? Or had she found her sister on her own, studied her life with predatory patience, and struck when Margot was most vulnerable? The bruises didn't answer that question. They just proved what I'd suspected. This wasn't some bloodless financial crime. This was violent, physical, dangerous, and somewhere, Margot was at the mercy of whoever had planned this. I backed away from the bed slowly, carefully. The woman, I still didn't know her name, didn't know her story, didn't know if she was monster or victim. Slept on, arms still exposed, bruises visible in the silver light. In my pocket, the DNA evidence that would prove her deception. On her wrist, evidence of violence I couldn't yet decode. 48 hours until the lab results. 48 hours to figure out whether I was sleeping next to an accomplice forced into this nightmare, or the woman who'd orchestrated my wife's disappearance. 48 hours to find Margot before whatever plan this was reached its violent conclusion. I climbed back into bed, keeping distance between us, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Every small sound made me tense. Every shift of her body made me calculate escape routes, because I didn't know anymore which side of this violence she was on. All I knew was that it wouldn't stop until I found my wife. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, and I knew before I opened it that Vernon and Phyllis Caldwell hadn't come to check on their grieving daughter. They'd come to see which woman was sleeping in my bed. I'd been staring at the DNA evidence bag all morning, hidden in my truck's glove compartment, trying to reconcile the bruises on her wrist with the calculated theft of a life, trying to figure out if I was living with a victim or a monster. Now my in-laws stood on the doorstep, and the answer was written all over their faces. Vernon's hand gripped Phyllis's elbow too tight, steering her like she might bolt. Both of them looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen them, faces drawn and pale. Phyllis's eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying for days. "Bryce," Vernon said, voice too formal, too careful. "We should have called. We wanted to see how Margot is doing." But he didn't ask how she was. Didn't say our daughter or anything possessive. Just Margot, like a name disconnected from identity. "This is unexpected," I said, stepping back to let them in. Movement behind me. She came down the stairs, and I watched my in-laws' faces as they saw her. Phyllis's breath caught audibly. Vernon's jaw tightened. For just a second, naked horror crossed both their faces before Vernon controlled his expression into something approaching neutral. But I'd seen it. That flash of recognition. That split second of looking at someone and knowing they were wrong. "Mom? Dad?" The imposter's voice held genuine confusion. "This is unexpected. Come in." Phyllis made a small sound in her throat. Couldn't seem to look directly at the woman wearing her daughter's face. "We won't stay long," Phyllis managed, voice shaking. "We just needed to—" She trailed off, staring. Just staring at this woman she'd claimed on the phone didn't exist. How many people were living this lie? How many of us sat in this room knowing the woman on the couch wasn't Margot? The living room felt like a hostage situation. We arranged ourselves in careful positions. Vernon and Phyllis on the love seat, the imposter in Margot's favorite chair, me standing by the doorway like I might need to block an escape. She offered coffee. Phyllis accepted with a nod, but didn't drink it, just held the cup in trembling hands, watching the surface ripple with each shake. Vernon filled the silence with weather talk. Work talk. Anything except the woman sitting 3 feet away wearing his daughter's face and living in his daughter's house. "The garage must be busy," he said to me. "January's always slow for repairs, isn't it?" "Actually picks up," I said. "Cold weather, engine troubles." "Right, of course." Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. The imposter. I couldn't think of her as Margot anymore, not with her real parents sitting here unable to look at her, shifted in her chair. "Mom, are you okay? You seem upset." Phyllis's eyes filled with tears. "I'm fine. Just worried about you. After everything." 10 parents forget the face of their own child? Or was the horror in Phyllis's eyes the recognition that she was looking at the daughter she'd given away? "We heard about the miscarriage," Vernon said, still not looking directly at her. "Terrible thing. Terrible timing. Terrible timing." Directly at her. "Terrible thing. Terrible timing. Terrible timing." The words landed strange, like he meant something else entirely. "I'm recovering," she said quietly. Then, with more edge, "I'm surprised you came. You usually don't visit without calling first." Vernon's control cracked slightly. "We had reason to be concerned." "About what?" "About—" He stopped himself, looked at Phyllis. Some silent communication passed between them. Phyllis set down her untouched coffee with enough force that it sloshed. "Vernon, we should go." "We just got here," the imposter protested. And I heard real confusion now. Real fear. She didn't understand why they were looking at her like this, why her supposed parents were treating her like a stranger. Or maybe she understood perfectly and was terrified they were about to expose her. "Your mother hasn't been sleeping well," Vernon said, standing abruptly. "We should go now." Phyllis stood too, unsteady on her feet. They moved toward the door like prisoners being released, desperate to escape. Then Phyllis turned back. She looked at the woman in Margot's chair, and 40 years of buried guilt rose to the surface. Tears streamed down her face. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Saskia," she whispered. "I'm so—" Horror flooded her face as she realized what she'd said, what name she'd used. "I mean Margot," she corrected frantically. "I meant Margot. I'm tired, I'm confused, But it was too late. Saskia. The name hung in the air like a confession 40 years in the making. The imposter went absolutely still, staring at Phyllis with an expression I couldn't read. Triumph? Triumph? Terror? Vindication? "How do you know that name?" she asked, voice small and shaken. Vernon grabbed Phyllis's arm. "We're leaving." "Vernon!" "Now, Phyllis." He practically dragged her to the door. Phyllis was crying openly now, looking back at the woman on the couch, at Saskia, with something that might have been apology or grief or fear. "I'm sorry," Phyllis sobbed. "I'm so sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing. We were so young, we didn't know." "Phyllis!" Vernon's voice cut like a blade. "Not another word." The door slammed behind them. Engine starting outside, tires on gravel, the sound of my in-laws fleeing the truth they'd buried for 4 decades. I stood in the sudden silence, staring at the woman I now knew was named Saskia. She sat frozen in Margot's chair, face white, hands gripping the armrests. The confidence she'd worn for days had shattered. She looked young suddenly, vulnerable, caught. "Bryce," she said, voice breaking. "I can explain." But I was already moving toward the door, toward my truck, toward Vernon and Phyllis's car disappearing down the street. Because they knew. They'd always known. And they were going to tell me where my real wife was before I called every cop in Harris County. I didn't let the silence stretch. The moment Vernon and Phyllis were gone, I turned to face the woman I'd called my wife, the stranger named Saskia, and said the only thing that mattered. "Why did you call Terrence Barker about accelerating the trust transfer?" She'd been standing frozen by the window, watching her parents, Margot's parents, flee down the driveway. At my question, she spun around, face still pale from Phyllis's slip. "What?" "The lawyer," I said, keeping my voice level. "Terrence Barker. You called him yesterday morning asking to expedite the trust fund transfer. Why? Her eyes widened. Genuine surprise or another performance? I don't know what you're talking about. He told me himself. Said you called at 8 a.m., wanted to accelerate the timeline, complete the paperwork before your birthday. Terrence is mistaken, she said quickly. Too quickly. I never called him. Why would I? You tell me, Saskia. The name landed between us like a grenade. She flinched, recovering fast, but I'd seen it. The recognition, the confirmation. That's not... Phyllis was confused. She's been under stress. She mixed up. She knew your name, I said. Didn't have to think about it. Just slipped out after 40 years of keeping it buried. So let's stop pretending. You're not Margot. You're her twin sister. The one Vernon and Phyllis gave away. And you called the family lawyer trying to steal $4.2 million. She stared at me, and I watched her recalculate. Decide which lie to try next. Terrence is lying to you, she said, voice shifting to wounded innocence. Don't you see what they're doing? Vernon's been trying to undermine us since we got married. He never thought you were good enough for his daughter. Now he's got the lawyer lying, got you doubting me, turning you against... I visited Terrence myself, I cut her off. Yesterday afternoon, asked about Margot's financial arrangements. He mentioned your call before I even brought it up. Described how anxious you sounded, how unlike yourself. Mid-confrontation, I noticed her hands. Margot always twisted her wedding ring when anxious, nervous energy she couldn't control. But Saskia's hands were perfectly still, controlled, even as her voice shook with manufactured emotion. Bryce, please, you're scaring me. Why are you interrogating me like this? Like I'm some kind of criminal? Answer the question. Did you call Terrence Barker? No, I told you I didn't. He has phone records, timestamps, your voice on his voicemail. I was bluffing about the voicemail, but I watched her face closely. She blinked, processed, adjusted her strategy again. Maybe I did call, she said slowly. I've been so stressed, so confused since we lost the baby. Maybe I don't remember. The trauma, the grief, it's all a blur. The real Margot had been genuinely broken after the miscarriage. I'd held her while she sobbed, unable to control her devastation, raw and real and utterly destroyed. The memory flashed sharp against Saskia's precisely timed tears now, and I recognized the performance. Don't, I said. Don't use that. Use what? Her voice cracked perfectly, tears welling up on cue. I'm trying to explain that I'm not myself. After everything we've been through, after we lost our baby, after I almost died. This is how you treat me? Like I'm lying? Like I'm some kind of imposter? But I'd seen real grief, lived with it for days in this house. The woman in front of me was performing an approximation, hitting the notes but missing the music. Where's Margot? I asked quietly. What? My wife, the real Margot. Where is she? Saskia's tears stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Her face went blank, then hardened into something cold and calculated. You're being paranoid, she said, voice flat now. Vernon's gotten into your head. You're seeing conspiracies that don't exist. I saw the missing scar on your wrist. I watched you put sugar in your coffee. I heard Phyllis call you by your real name. So I'm asking you one more time. Where is my wife? She stared at me for a long moment. I watched emotions flicker across her face. Anger, fear, calculation, resignation. Then she settled on something new. Exhausted defiance. I can't do this right now, she said, voice going quiet. I need space. I need to think. She moved toward the bedroom. I stepped forward instinctively, reaching out to stop her, then froze mid-gesture, my hand suspended in air. Because I didn't know if touching this stranger was safe anymore. Didn't know what she was capable of. Didn't know if those bruises on her wrist came from being restrained or from restraining someone else. She saw me hesitate, and something that might have been satisfaction crossed her face before she continued past me. "We'll talk tomorrow," she said over her shoulder. "When you've calmed down." The bedroom door clicked shut. The lock turned with finality. I stood in our living room, my living room, Margot's living room, listening to silence and understanding with absolute clarity that the woman behind that door had just shown me her entire playbook. Deny, deflect, weaponize emotion, retreat. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, not with grief, but with recognition. If she could perform that well, what else had been an act? How many moments over the past days had been calculated manipulation? The DNA results were due back any moment. But I already knew the answer. The question now wasn't whether she was Saskia Townsend. The question was how long she'd been planning this, whether she was working alone or had help, and whether I could stop her before the trust transferred on February 23rd. 27 days. I had 27 days to find my wife, prove the impersonation, and prevent the theft of everything Margot owned. And I was done playing defense. My hands were black with motor oil when the phone rang, and I almost didn't answer. Until I saw Gentech Diagnostics on the screen. I'd left Saskia locked in the bedroom last night and driven straight to the garage before dawn, needing the familiar rhythm of wrenches and engines to quiet my mind. Playing defense was over. Now I needed proof. Evidence. Ammunition. The DNA results were that ammunition. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered, "This is Bryce Garrett. Mr. Garrett, this is Gentech Diagnostics, calling with your DNA comparison results." The technician's voice was professional, clinical. "We've completed the analysis on the hair sample you submitted." My heart hammered. "And? The sample you provided doesn't match the patient records for Margot Caldwell on file with Memorial Hermann Hospital. I'd expected this." Still, hearing it confirmed made the shop tilt slightly. "However," the technician continued, "our analysis shows identical twin genetic markers. The DNA is not a match to the individual whose medical records you referenced, but it indicates a monozygotic twin relationship. Identical twins, sharing the same genetic profile. We ran a specialized epigenetic marker panel once the standard comparison came back inconclusive for a twin match. That's how we confirmed monozygotic twins instead of just a familial match." "You're telling me my wife has an identical twin?" I said, even though I knew. Even though Phyllis had confirmed it yesterday with that single slip. Saskia. "The genetic evidence is conclusive, Mr. Garrett. Identical twins, no doubt." I thanked her, hung up, and stood in the garage staring at the oil change I'd been working on. A 2018 Honda Civic, Mrs. Henderson's car, routine maintenance that suddenly felt absurd against what I'd just learned. I set the phone down, the familiar rhythm of the shop suddenly distant against the unreality of what I'd just heard. Scientific proof. Not suspicion, not paranoia. Scientific proof that the woman in my house wasn't Margot, which meant the real Margot was somewhere else. Somewhere Saskia had put her, hidden her, imprisoned her. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Detective Ramsey. He answered on the second ring. "Garrett, I was about to call you." "The DNA came back," I said. "Identical twin. It's confirmed." "I know. The lab copied me on the results. Listen, I need you to find Margot Caldwell." I cut him off. "The real one. The woman in my house is her identical twin. I don't know where my actual wife is, but she's been missing for days, and nobody's looking for her because everyone thinks she's safe at home." "That's what I was calling about," Ramsey said. "After we confirmed the twin relationship, I started digging into the Caldwell family history. Birth records, adoption files, sealed documents. And? Give me 20 minutes. I'll call you back. The line went dead. I sat in my office, surrounded by invoices and work orders and the ordinary machinery of my business, and tried to breathe through the panic. Where was she? How long had Saskia been planning this? How many days had my real wife been held somewhere while I slept beside her replacement? How do you tell the difference between identical twins when one has stolen the other's entire life? 14 minutes later, my phone rang. Caldwell family had twins in 1985, Ramsey said without preamble. February 23rd, Dallas Memorial Hospital. But only one birth certificate was filed publicly. Margot Caldwell, born to Vernon and Phyllis Caldwell, 7 pounds 2 ounces. And the other one? Sealed private adoption through a Dallas agency. Took me 3 calls and one very cooperative records clerk to get the details, but it's there. Second twin daughter, adopted out within 48 hours of birth. Name changed to Saskia Townsend, raised by foster families in East Texas. The name confirmed. The abandonment confirmed. Everything Phyllis's guilt-stricken face had told me yesterday, now documented in 40-year-old paperwork. So Saskia isn't just some con artist, I said. She's Margot's actual sister. And she's been planning this for how long? Hard to say. But from what I'm seeing, she had access to Margot's life story somehow. Maybe tracked down her biological family, discovered she had a twin living with wealth and opportunity while she bounced through foster care. The resentment would be massive, I finished. Enough to plan this for years. Study Margot's life. Wait for the perfect moment. The trust fund, Ramsey said. I looked into that too. Transfers full control on Margot's 40th birthday. That's in 26 days, right. So Saskia needs to maintain the impersonation for less than a month. Get the money transferred. Disappear. Probably planned to be in the Caymans or somewhere without extradition before anyone figured it out. 40 years. She'd waited 40 years for this. Except Vernon and Phyllis know, I said. They gave her away. They know both daughters exist. Are they helping her? Unknown. Could be she's blackmailing them with exposure. Could be they're trying to fix a 40-year-old mistake. Could be they're just terrified of the scandal. I don't care about their reasons, I said. I care about finding Margot. If Saskia's been in my house for a week, where is my wife? Silence on the line. The kind that meant Ramsey was thinking the same thing I was, but didn't want to say it. We need to consider, he said carefully, that Saskia may not have planned for Margot to survive this. If she permanently replaces her sister, there can't be. Don't, I said. Don't finish that sentence. Margot is alive. She has to be alive. Then we find her fast, Ramsey said. Because whoever's holding her, whatever agreement Saskia has with them, it expires when that trust fund transfers. After that, Margot becomes a liability. I stared at the calendar on my office wall. 26 days until February 23rd. 26 days until Saskia got the money and my wife became expendable. What do we do? I asked. You go home, Ramsey said. Act normal. Don't let Saskia know we've confirmed the twin relationship. I'll work on tracking her movements, finding associates, looking for properties where someone could be held. But Garrett, be careful. If she suspects, if she feels cornered, I understand, but I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my garage office, staring at my phone, Ramsey's words echoing. Saskia wasn't just an imposter. She was Margot's twin sister, abandoned at birth, who'd spent 4 decades planning this takeover, which meant one terrifying question. If Saskia had been living in my house for the past week, where was Margot? Was she still alive? Vernon and Phyllis sat across from me in the interrogation room, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw my in-laws look afraid. Detective Ramsey had called them 2 hours after confirming the adoption records. his voice leaving no room for refusal. They'd arrived separately, Vernon in his Mercedes, Phyllis in her Lexus, and now they sat in metal chairs under fluorescent lights that made their expensive clothes look cheap and their guilty faces look old. Ramsey spread the documents across the table like evidence at trial. Birth records, hospital paperwork, sealed adoption files he'd somehow unsealed. These records show you had twin daughters in 1985, he said, voice flat and official. February 23rd, Dallas Memorial Hospital. You kept Margot. Who was the other one? Vernon's jaw tightened. Phyllis wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. This is a private family matter, Vernon said, lawyer voice activating automatically. That has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with the woman living in my house pretending to be your daughter. I cut him off. The woman you called Saskia yesterday. The twin sister you gave away and never told anyone about. Phyllis flinched like I'd slapped her. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, Ramsey said, leaning forward. I've got DNA evidence proving the woman in your son-in-law's home is not Margot. I've got adoption records proving you had twins. And I've got you on record from a phone call 2 nights ago admitting you couldn't keep both of them. So you can either explain this voluntarily, or I can start asking these questions in front of a grand jury investigating kidnapping and fraud. I watched Phyllis's hands twist her pearl necklace. The same nervous gesture Margot inherited. The same gesture I'd watched Saskia perform flawlessly for a week. We were young, Vernon said finally. It was 1985. We weren't married yet. Having twins out of wedlock would have destroyed both families. My father, Phyllis's parents, the scandal would have been. So you gave one away, I said. Kept the other. Built your perfect family on a lie. We thought we were doing what was best, Phyllis whispered. We were 23 years old. We had no money, no support. Vernon's father would have disowned us if he'd known about the pregnancy at all, let alone twins. We could barely figure out how to manage one baby. Did Margot know? I asked. The question I'd been carrying since Phyllis's slip yesterday. Did you ever tell her she had a sister? Silence. Phyllis's eyes filled with tears. Did you? I pressed harder. Vernon, stop, Phyllis said suddenly. Just stop. We can't keep lying about this. Phyllis, no. She turned to face me directly for the first time, tears streaming. No, Bryce. We never told her. Margot died. She caught herself, hand flying to her mouth. I mean, Margot doesn't know. Margot never knew. How do you tell your daughter she has a twin sister you abandoned 40 years ago? The adoption was supposed to be sealed, Vernon said, voice cracking. Private. Closed. The agency promised us she'd go to a good family, that the records would never be opened, that our daughter would never... Which daughter? I asked. Which one did you think would never find out? Margot, who you raised with lies, or Saskia, who you threw away? Phyllis broke then, completely, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. We thought we were protecting our family, she managed through tears. We got pregnant before the wedding. Vernon's father was old Houston money, very conservative. If he'd known we were having a baby out of wedlock, he would have cut Vernon off entirely. But twins, 2 babies, we couldn't hide that, couldn't explain it. So you chose, I said. You picked one daughter to keep and one to discard. It wasn't like that, Vernon protested weakly. Then what was it like? Ramsey asked. Walk me through how you decided which baby to abandon. Vernon's face went gray. The hospital marked them. Baby A, Baby B. Margot was Baby A. She was born first, weighed more, seemed stronger. The social worker said the adoption family was excellent, well-screened, financially stable. We thought Saskia would have a good life. Saskia, I said. You named her, then gave her away. The adoptive family chose the name, Phyllis said. We only knew because the agency told us years later, when we asked for, when we needed to know. She stopped herself, but I heard what she wasn't saying. You checked on her, I said. You knew where she was. What happened to her? Phyllis's silence was confirmation. The adoption was supposed to be sealed forever, Vernon repeated, like a mantra. We never thought, we never imagined she'd find us. That she'd discover Margot existed. That she'd want revenge, I finished. For being the daughter you threw away while her sister got everything. Margot never knew Saskia existed. When did she contact you? Ramsey asked. When did Saskia first reach out? Vernon and Phyllis exchanged a look. 6 months ago, Phyllis whispered. She sent a letter. Said she'd found her adoption records, traced them back to us. Discovered she had a twin sister living in Houston. She wanted to meet Margot. Wanted to. You said no, I guessed. We said it wasn't possible, Vernon said. That it would be too complicated, too painful. That Margot didn't know about her, and finding out after 40 years would be devastating. We offered money if she'd go away, I said. You tried to pay her off. Phyllis nodded, crying harder. She took the money, Vernon said. $20,000. Said she understood. That she'd leave us alone. And then she came anyway, I said. Studied Margot's life. Learned everything. Waited for the perfect moment. And now my wife is missing, and her twin is stealing her life. Phyllis was sobbing. Vernon staring at his hands. And I understood the full horror. Saskia had grown up knowing she'd been abandoned, knowing somewhere her identical twin had the family and fortune that should have been shared. She'd spent decades planning this revenge, and now my wife, the sister who never knew, was missing. Ramsey spread a year's worth of surveillance photos across the table, and my wife's face stared up at me from dozens of angles. Grocery store, garage, morning jogs, every moment catalogued by a stranger. We'd left Vernon and Phyllis in the interrogation room, their confession hanging in the air like poison. Now Ramsey was showing me what he'd found buried in Saskia's background check. Proof that this wasn't impulse or opportunity. This was warfare. Saskia didn't just wake up one day and decide to steal your wife's life, Ramsey said, sorting the photos into chronological stacks. She studied Margot for 12 months. Started January 2024. Hired a private investigator out of Dallas. Professional-grade surveillance. I picked up the nearest photo. Margot coming out of our house, coffee in hand, heading to her car. The timestamp read February 14th, 2024. Valentine's Day. I'd made her breakfast that morning, kissed her goodbye. Had no idea someone was photographing her from across the street. Every coffee shop, every friend's house, every appointment, Ramsey continued, spreading more photos. It's all here, down to the minute. The investigator's logs are detailed enough to reconstruct her entire year. More photos. Margot at the grocery store. Margot laughing with friends at lunch. Margot at her book club, at the dentist, getting gas, walking into our garage to surprise me with lunch. I picked up that last one. Margot laughing outside our garage, taken without her knowledge. Felt violation like a physical weight. She was learning how to become her, I said. Exactly. Look at this. Ramsey pulled out a thick binder. PI reports, organized by month. The investigator didn't just follow Margot. He interviewed people. Neighbors, the barista at her coffee shop, the receptionist at her gym. Posed as someone doing marketing research, asked about her habits, her preferences, what she ordered, how she acted. I flipped through the reports, painfully detailed observations. Subject takes coffee black, no sugar. Dislikes sweetened beverages. Subject runs Tuesday, Thursday mornings, 6 a.m., same route through Herman Park. Subject visits parents first Sunday of each month. Subject appears close with husband. Physical affection noted during garage visits. My hands shook holding the pages. There's more, Ramsey said quietly. The investigator tracked social media, pulled public records, found medical information. Saskia knew everything, including this. He slid a report across the table. The miscarriage date was flagged in red, circled twice. Miscarriage, first pregnancy, Memorial Hermann Hospital. Patient extremely distressed, husband present throughout. She knew about the miscarriage, I said. Not just that it happened. She knew the exact date. The miscarriage just happened, Ramsey said. That's when Margot would be most vulnerable, most fragile, most likely to withdraw from friends and family in grief. How does someone spend 12 months studying another person's pain, preparing to weaponize it? The PI's final report is dated January 20th, Ramsey continued. 3 days before your wife disappeared. 3 days before Saskia made her move. The report concludes with a detailed assessment of Margot's current emotional state, daily routine, vulnerabilities, and this line. He pointed to the last paragraph. Subject will be emotionally compromised in the immediate aftermath of pregnancy loss. Recommend action during this time frame for maximum vulnerability and reduced social contact. Recommend action. Like Margot was a target, a mark. This wasn't identity theft, I said. This was hunting. Premeditated, calculated, and executed with precision, Ramsey agreed. Saskia waited until the exact moment Margot would be most isolated, most broken, then made the switch. Nobody questioned it because Margot was expected to be withdrawn and different. I thought about those first days. How she'd seemed off, but I'd attributed it to grief. How she'd been quiet, but I'd thought she needed space. How every wrong detail I'd dismissed as trauma when it was actually a stranger learning to perform my wife's devastation. There's something else, Ramsey said. He dug through the evidence pile, pulled out a map marked with red ink. Found this in Saskia's apartment when we searched it this afternoon. Look at the circled address. Warrenmananhavik Navigation Boulevard, East Houston Industrial District. What is it? Abandoned warehouse. Been empty for 2 years since the shipping company went bankrupt. But look at these. He laid out surveillance photos, not of Margot this time, but of Saskia herself. Neighbor with a security camera caught her visiting this address. January 15th, stayed 40 minutes. January 21st, stayed 30 minutes. Before Margot disappeared, I said, pulse hammering. Right. She was preparing something, setting something up. The warehouse. She'd been there twice. That's where she is, I said, already standing. That's where Margot is. Ramsey stood too, but his hand caught my arm before I could grab my keys. We don't know that for certain. Then we go find out. We go together, he said firmly. And we go smart. If Margot is there and Saskia has someone watching, rushing in could get your wife killed. We need backup, we need a plan, and we need to move carefully. She's been there for days, I said. Alone, scared, thinking nobody's looking for her because everyone thinks she's safe at home. I can't. I know. Ramsey's voice softened slightly. But 20 minutes of planning could be the difference between rescue and tragedy. Let me call for backup. We'll have units positioned around the building within the hour. Then we go in smart. Extract your wife safe and make sure Saskia can't run. The warehouse address burned in my mind. 4700 Navigation Boulevard. 26 days until the trust transferred, and my wife might be 20 minutes away, locked in a building her own sister had scouted twice. 1 hour, I said. Then we're going in, backup or not. Ramsey was already on his phone, calling for units, organizing the rescue that was 3 days too late but might, please God, still be in time. The house was silent when I walked in at dawn, and I knew before I reached the bedroom. Saskia was gone. Ramsey and I had spent the night coordinating the warehouse raid, positioning backup units, planning the approach. We'd agreed to move at first light. But I'd wanted 1 hour of rest, wanted to check on Saskia before we went in, wanted to maintain the illusion that I suspected nothing. Except she was smarter than that. The bedroom closet stood half empty, her toiletries cleared from the bathroom. No note, no explanation, just the careful erasure of someone who'd never really been here at all. I called Ramsey immediately. She's gone. Cleared out sometime after midnight. Damn it! I heard him moving, car starting in the background. All her known accounts and phones went dark at 11 p.m. last night. We thought it was just her covering tracks, but she knew, I said. Somehow she knew we found the warehouse. I stood in our bedroom, staring at the empty hangars where Saskia's clothes had been, and felt time collapsing. Then we move now, Ramsey said, before she can relocate Margot. Meet me at the warehouse in 20 minutes. I was already grabbing my keys. Walshreen 700, Navigation Boulevard sat in the industrial wasteland east of downtown, a hulking concrete shell surrounded by chain link and weeds. By the time I arrived, 3 patrol cars and Ramsey's sedan were already positioned around the building, officers checking perimeters. Ramsey met me at the fence line. Building's been vacant for 2 years. No power, no water. But someone's been here recently. We found fresh tire tracks in the gravel. We approached the main entrance together. The steel door hung slightly open, lock forced sometime in the past few hours. Fresh scratches on the metal showed where someone had pried it. Inside, the warehouse stretched dark and cavernous. Our flashlights cut through dusty air, illuminating concrete floors and rusted machinery left behind by whatever shipping company had gone bankrupt here. But in the far corner, signs of recent life. Empty water bottles, fast food wrappers from a place 3 blocks away, a mattress on the floor, thin and stained. Place was vacated within the last day, maybe less, Ramsey said, kneeling by the mattress. The mattress still had the indentation where someone had lain. My throat went tight. Someone was held here. Look at this. Ramsey pointed his flashlight at the corner of the mattress. Rope fragments, cut clean and left behind. Restraints. Whoever was here was tied up. I moved around the makeshift prison cell, cataloging evidence. The water bottles all the same brand. Food wrappers dated within the past week. A thin blanket crumpled against the wall. Margot was here, I said. Where is she now? Ramsey stood, frustration written across his face. Saskia moved her, knew we were coming and relocated before we could— Wait, one of the officers called from deeper in the warehouse. Detective, you need to see this. We moved toward his voice, toward the far corner where the flashlight beam had stopped on the concrete wall. Before I show you what we found written there, if you're still with me, comment. A, if you think Margot's still alive. B, if you think it's too late. And add 1 reason why in 5 to 10 words. Please note, what follows contains some recreated details for storytelling purposes, but the message is what matters most. The lipstick message was smeared across the concrete in deep red. Berry wine, the exact shade Margot had worn for years. An arrow, crude but deliberate, pointing east. And underneath, scratched into the concrete with something sharp. BG. My initials. Bryce over here, on the wall. I was already moving, flashlight beam shaking as my hands trembled. The arrow was maybe 2 feet long, the lipstick thick and intentional. She'd pressed hard enough to leave color deep in the concrete's pores. That's her lipstick, I said, voice cracking. Berry wine. She's worn it for years. I'd know that shade anywhere. Ramsey pulled out his phone, photographing the wall from multiple angles. Forensics can confirm, but if you're certain, I'm certain. I reached out, almost touched the arrow, then pulled my hand back. She left me a message. She knew I'd come. East. Saskia's moving her east. The lipstick arrow pointed east like a lifeline thrown across an ocean. She's alive, Ramsey said, something like wonder in his voice. Your wife is alive and fighting back, and leaving breadcrumbs. I looked at my initials scratched into concrete. She'd used something metal, a nail, maybe, or a piece of wire. How long had it taken her to scratch those letters while bound and terrified? How much courage had she needed to believe I'd find this? East covers a lot of territory, Ramsey said. Half of Texas, Louisiana, beyond. But it's direction. It's more than we had 5 minutes ago. I was already pulling out my phone, photographing the arrow from every angle, documenting proof that my wife was alive. Ramsey called for the forensics team, started coordinating the evidence collection. I stood in front of that wall, staring at Margot's message, and felt something shift inside me. She wasn't just a victim. She'd been held here for days, maybe a week, and she'd still found a way to fight, to leave clues, to tell me she was alive and where they were taking her. We need to figure out where Saskia would go, I said. East. What's east that matters to her? I'll pull property records, look for connections. Maybe she has family there. Maybe she rented something under a different name. 25 days, I said. We have 25 days until the trust transfers. After that, Margot becomes... We'll find her before then, Ramsey said firmly. Your wife just gave us a direction. Now we follow it. Ramsey was already on the phone coordinating search teams as I photographed the arrow, the initials, every detail of Margot's message. She was alive. She was fighting. And Saskia was moving her east. But east covered half of Texas and beyond. 25 days until the trust transferred, and my wife had become a hostage in her own sister's revenge. The call came at 9:47 a.m. on January 29th, less than 3 hours after we'd found Margot's message in that warehouse. I was in Ramsey's office at the Harris County Sheriff's Department, staring at crime scene photos of the lipstick arrow pointing east, when my phone vibrated with a number I didn't recognize. Houston area code. My hand shook as I answered. Hello? Bryce. Saskia's voice was calm, almost pleasant, like we were old friends catching up. I assume you found my little staging area on Navigation Boulevard. Cute message, wasn't it? Margot's always been theatrical. Ramsey lunged for the recording equipment. I put the call on speaker, my heart hammering against my ribs. Where is she? My voice came out strangled. Safe. For now. A pause. I could hear her breathing, measured and controlled. I'm calling because we need to have a conversation about what happens next. Adult to adult. No police, no theatrics, just business. You kidnapped my wife. There's no business here. I'm offering you a deal, Bryce. Shut up and listen. I bit down on my rage. Ramsey was already signaling his tech team across the bullpen, trying to trace the call. 2 officers scrambled to their computers. I don't want your money, Saskia said. I don't want a ransom paid in duffel bags of cash like some bad movie. What I want is what's rightfully mine. The Caldwell Family Trust Fund. $4.2 million that should have been split between Margot and me the day we turned 40. But Margot got it all because Daddy decided I was unstable. So this is about the trust. This is about justice. And you're going to help me get it. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? February 23rd. That's when the trust transfers fully into Margot's control. No more restrictions. No more oversight. She'll be able to move that money anywhere she wants. And here's what you're going to do, Bryce. You're going to help me become Margot long enough to redirect those funds. I couldn't breathe. Ramsey's eyes widened, his pen frozen over his notepad. You're insane, I whispered. I'm practical. Listen carefully. You're going to vouch for me. Tell the trust administrators that Margot's been traumatized, that she's changed her appearance for safety reasons, that she's using her middle name now. You're her husband. Your word carries weight. We'll have forged documents. A notary I've already paid off. You'll stand beside me and swear I'm your wife, and we'll transfer that money into an account I control. Why would I ever? Because if you don't, Margot dies. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of Ramsey's desk to keep from falling. You have 48 hours, Saskia continued, her voice cold and businesslike. Friday, January 31st, 8 p.m. I'll text you the location tomorrow night. Come alone. Bring no one. If I see police, if I see anyone but you, your wife's body gets dumped in the Neches River and you'll never find her. I need proof she's alive. My voice was barely audible. Static crackled. Then I heard it. Ragged breathing in the background. A sob that I'd recognize anywhere. The sound of Margot crying made my chest constrict. Tell him, Saskia's voice said, distant now, speaking to someone else. Silence. Shuffling sounds. Another sob. She won't talk, Saskia said, back on the phone. Still being stubborn. But you heard her. She's breathing, she's crying, she's alive. For now. Saskia, please. 48 hours, Bryce. Think about it. You help me get what's mine. I let Margot go. You refuse, you call the cops, you try anything heroic. She dies. Simple math. I can't help you steal $4.2 million. You can and you will. Because the alternative is watching your wife's funeral. Do we understand each other? Ramsey was frantically writing on a notepad, holding it up. Keep her talking. Where do we meet? I asked, my voice shaking. How do I know you won't just kill her anyway? You don't. But it's the only chance you've got, isn't it? I'll send details tomorrow. Friday at 8. East Texas. That's all you need to know for now. Come ready to play your part, Bryce. Rehearse your lines. Practice saying, "This is my wife, Margot Garrett," while looking at my face. Get comfortable with it. The trust administrators know what Margot looks like. Margot and I are identical twins, you idiot. Same height, same build, same bone structure. I've already dyed my hair, got colored contacts. With the right makeup and your testimony, they'll never know the difference. Grief changes people, Bryce. Trauma changes people. You'll sell it because you have to. Ramsey held up a phone, showing me a text from his tech team. Traced to East Texas, still triangulating. I need more time, I said desperately. 48 hours isn't... It's what you get. I've waited 40 years for this money, Bryce. You can wait 2 days to decide if your wife lives or dies. Let me talk to her. Let me hear her voice. Another pause. Rustling sounds. Footsteps. Then faint and broken. Bryce, Margot's voice. Hoarse, terrified, but unmistakably hers. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my vision blurring. Ramsey's tech officer burst through the door, shaking his head. Call originated from a cell tower near Nacogdoches, but she hung up before we could narrow it further. East Texas, like she said. 100-mile radius. I sank into the chair across from Ramsey's desk. 48 hours. Friday at 8 p.m. Location to be sent. Come alone. Help Saskia become Margot. Legally. Sign away $4.2 million and maybe, get my wife back alive. I watched Saskia walk into Terrence Barker's office through the two-way glass, wearing Margot's face and carrying a phone in her left hand like a detonator. It had taken me less than an hour after her ransom call to decide I couldn't wait 48 hours. Couldn't let Friday's deadline arrive with Margot still hidden somewhere in East Texas and Saskia holding all the cards. So I'd called her back at noon on January 29th with a lie I hoped would save my wife's life. I'll help you, I'd told her. Whatever you need, just don't hurt her. Saskia had been suspicious immediately. You changed your mind fast. I don't have a choice. You win. But I need to see the paperwork first. Understand what I'm signing. Can we meet tomorrow at Terrence Barker's office? He handled the trust originally. He'll have the transfer documents ready. A long pause, then, 2 p.m., come alone. She'd hung up before I could respond. Now, 26 hours later, Ramsey and 3 officers were crammed into the adjacent conference room with me. Watching through the one-way mirror as Saskia crossed Barker's office threshold. She'd dyed her hair Margot's shade of auburn, wore Margot's favorite gray blazer. But the way she moved was all wrong. Sharper, more predatory. When she sits down, give us 2 minutes before you signal, Ramsey whispered to Barker through the earpiece we'd fitted him with that morning. Barker nodded, his expression carefully neutral. He was 52, a family lawyer who'd known the Caldwells for decades. And when I'd told him Saskia had kidnapped Margot to steal the trust fund, he'd turned pale and agreed to help without hesitation. If she brought the phone, we have to assume it's connected to something at Margot's location, one of Ramsey's officers muttered. Ramsey's jaw tightened. Then we take her alive and make her give up the location. No other option. I pressed my palm against the glass, watching Saskia scan the room. Through the glass, I watched her check the exits, counting steps to the door, and recognized the same survival instinct Margot had inherited. Twins, even separated at birth, moving through the world with identical wariness. Barker stood, extending his hand. Ms. Garrett, please sit down. Your husband explained you'd like to review the trust transfer documentation ahead of the February deadline. Saskia didn't shake his hand. She sat slowly in the chair across from his desk, the phone still clutched in her left palm, screen visible. Her eyes swept the office, bookshelves, windows, door, before settling on me. You changed your mind awfully fast, Bryce, she said quietly. Yesterday you were searching warehouses. Today you're signing papers? My throat went dry. I want my wife back. You win. Just tell me she's safe. Safe is relative. She set the phone on the desk between us, but kept her hand beside it, fingers splayed. This phone is all that's keeping her alive right now. One button, and the room she's in locks permanently. Sealed. No air. She'd have maybe 6 hours before she suffocates, so let's not do anything stupid. The room tilted. Ramsey grabbed my shoulder through the fabric of my jacket. I'd forgotten he could see my reaction through the glass. Barker cleared his throat, shuffling papers with shaking hands. The trust transfer requires both spouses' signatures and 2 forms of identification. Ms. Garrett, I'll need to verify. You'll verify nothing until I decide we're actually doing this, Saskia interrupted. She leaned back, eyes fixed on me. You called me 12 hours after I gave you a 48-hour deadline. You offered to cooperate before I even sent the meeting location. You're either the most devoted husband in Houston or the dumbest. I'm desperate, I said, and that part wasn't a lie. You have Margot. You have all the leverage. I just want her home. Her thumb drifted over the phone screen. Where's Detective Ramsey right now, Bryce? My blood froze. I assume he's still investigating, I managed. I haven't told the police anything about this meeting. Liar. Saskia stood abruptly, grabbing the phone. Her thumb rested on the screen, 1 inch from murder. You think I'm stupid? You think I didn't consider you'd try to trap me? Ramsey was already moving. The conference room door burst open, and he rushed into Barker's office, badge raised, 2 officers flanking him. Saskia Townsend, you're under arrest for kidnapping, and Saskia's thumb hovered over the phone. One more step, and I press this button. Margot suffocates in a locked room, and you'll never find her body. Everyone froze. Saskia, please. I raised my hands, stepping between her and Ramsey. Don't. We can work this out without... You brought the police, Bryce. Her voice was ice. You chose wrong. She backed toward the door, phone held high like a grenade. Ramsey's hand was on his weapon, but he didn't draw it. How do you arrest someone when their death means your wife's death too? If you press that button, you lose your leverage, Ramsey said carefully. Margot dies, you get nothing. No trust fund, no freedom, just murder charges. If I press this button, I get revenge, Saskia corrected. Margot took everything from me. If I can't have the money, neither can she. Neither can you, Bryce. You don't want revenge, I said desperately. You want the trust fund. We can still do this. Friday, like you said, I'll vouch for you. Just please don't. Friday's off. She reached the doorway, glancing into the hall. Empty. You had one job, Bryce. Come alone, you failed. Ramsey lunged forward. Saskia's thumb dropped toward the screen. Stop! I screamed. Ramsey froze mid-step. Saskia's thumb was a millimeter from the button, her eyes locked on mine. Next time you see me, she said softly, we'll be at Margot's funeral. She backed through the door, phone held high, and was gone before anyone could move. Ramsey was shouting into his radio, officers flooding the stairwell, but I knew we'd lost. She'd walked into the trap, turned it inside out, and escaped with the one thing we couldn't take from her. Margot's life in her hands. 24 hours until Friday's deadline, and I'd just taught her she couldn't trust me. While Saskia was threatening us with her phone in Barker's office, Detective Ramsey's second team was cutting the lock on a warehouse 60 miles east in Beaumont. I didn't know that when she escaped. Didn't know Ramsey had never planned to arrest her at the lawyer's office, only to distract her long enough for his tactical unit to breach the real location. The meeting was theater, a diversion. All I knew, standing frozen in Barker's office with Saskia's phone still raised, was that somewhere Margot might already be dead. Every second Ramsey's radio stayed silent felt like proof the worst had happened. I didn't know it was a bluff. Neither did he, not for certain, not until the call came. Ramsey had spent the previous night tracing surveillance footage from gas stations and traffic cameras along Interstate 10 East, following the route Saskia must have taken from Nacogdoches. Found her car at 3 different rest stops. Cross-referenced with warehouse rental records in Jefferson, Orange, and Hardin counties. Narrowed it to 4 abandoned properties, sent teams to each simultaneously. The warehouse at 8200 Miller Road in Beaumont had fresh tire tracks in the gravel and a padlock that had been replaced within the past week. At 2:30 p.m. on January 30th, while I was watching Saskia back out of Barker's office with her phone held high, Officer Dale Morrison kicked in the warehouse door and found my wife. She was bound to a metal chair with zip ties, dehydrated, exhausted, but alive. A space heater glowed in the corner. Empty water bottles and granola bar wrappers littered the concrete floor. No ventilation system. No lock mechanism. No phone trigger connected to anything. The dead man's switch was a bluff. Saskia had been desperate, cornered, betting everything on intimidation and our fear. "Clear! We have the hostage! She's alive!" Morrison's voice crackled through Ramsey's radio 20 minutes after Saskia had vanished from the law office. I was still standing in Barker's office, staring at the empty doorway, spiraling into panic about what Saskia would do next, when Ramsey's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and his entire face changed. "Bryce!" He turned to me, hand covering the phone. "Bryce, listen. We have her. We have Margot, the real one." The floor tilted. "What?" "My team found her in Beaumont. She's safe. Alive. Medics are checking her now." "How do you know?" My voice came out strangled. "How can you be sure it's not—" Ramsey put the phone on speaker. A woman's voice, hoarse and shaking. "My name is Margot Caldwell Garrett. Please, my husband, Bryce, is he safe?" I stopped breathing. "Mrs. Garrett, you're safe now." Morrison's voice said through the speaker. Your husband is waiting for you. Ramsey played the recording of Margot's voice saying my name, and I heard 12 years of marriage in 3 syllables. The way she softened the R, the slight catch on the S, details Saskia could never fake. Details Saskia could. She knew things only Margot would know, Ramsey said quietly. Anniversary date. Your mother's maiden name. The name of your first dog. She's asking for you. Get to Memorial Herman now. I don't remember leaving Barker's office. Don't remember the drive across Houston, except in fragments. Red lights I ran, horns blaring, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. Ramsey radioed ahead, told the hospital I was coming, told them to let me through. I kept thinking it was another trick, another trap. Saskia pretending to be Margot so perfectly that even the police believed it. Or worse, that Margot was real but hurt beyond saving, that I'd arrived just in time to watch her die. Memorial Herman's emergency entrance loomed ahead at 3:45 p.m. I abandoned my truck in the ambulance bay, sprinted through the automatic doors. A nurse tried to stop me. Sir, you can't. Margot Garrett, I gasped. My wife, they just brought her. Room 4, this way. The hallway stretched forever. White tiles, fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic and fear. Voices murmuring behind curtains, medical equipment beeping in rhythms that sounded like countdowns. Then I saw her, really her, and my legs almost gave out. Margot was sitting on a hospital gurney, an IV in her left arm, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, face bruised along the left cheekbone, wrists marked with red lines from the zip ties. But her eyes, brown, warm, alive, locked on mine the instant I appeared in the doorway. Bryce. She said my name the way she always did, with that slight upward lilt at the end. My Bryce, you found me. I crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into my arms. She was shaking, or maybe I was, or maybe we both were. She smelled like concrete dust and sweat and the lavender shampoo she always used, and I buried my face in her hair and started crying. I knew you'd leave me clues, I whispered. The arrow, your initials. I knew you were fighting. I heard her on the phone with you. Margot's voice cracked. Heard her threaten you. I was so scared she'd hurt you, that you'd try to give her the money. Is it really over? I pulled back just enough to see her face, to confirm this wasn't a dream. Is she? She's in custody. Ramsey appeared in the doorway, exhausted but smiling. Picked her up on Highway 90 near the Louisiana border 20 minutes ago. Tried to run, but we had units waiting. It's over. You're safe. Margot started crying then, deep shuddering sobs against my chest, and I held her tighter. Her hand in mine felt like the first real thing I'd touched in a week. Real skin, real warmth, real pulse beating steady against my palm. The phone trigger, I said to Ramsey. Was it? Nothing. Pure bluff. There was no mechanism, no lock, nothing. She was desperate. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Margot was safe in my arms. Saskia was in custody, and the nightmare was ending. But as I held my wife in that emergency room, she whispered something that changed everything. Bryce. She called me by our mother's name. Saskia knows things about the Caldwell family that I don't. The trust fund was safe, but Saskia's story wasn't finished. Saskia's guilty plea had fast-tracked everything. No trial, just a swift plea deal her public defender negotiated to spare the Caldwells a media circus. 3 days after Margot came home, I sat in a Harris County courtroom, watching her identical twin sister stand before a judge in an orange jumpsuit. Margot had explained it to me in fragments during those first nights home. How Saskia had whispered their mother's maiden name during captivity, referenced family stories, Margot had never heard. Spoke about Vernon's drinking and Phyllis's affairs, like she'd lived through them herself. Saskia had spent years researching the family that abandoned her, piecing together a history she'd been erased from. Now that history was ending in criminal sentencing. Judge Catherine Reynolds, 62 years old, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, presided from the bench with the weary authority of someone who'd seen every variation of family destruction. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at Saskia. "Ms. Townsend, you stand accused of kidnapping in the first degree, fraud, identity theft, and attempted grand larceny in the theft by deception of the Caldwell family trust assets. Your attorney has indicated you wish to enter a plea. Is that correct?" Saskia's public defender, a young man named Marcus Webb, who looked barely 30, stood beside her. "Yes, Your Honor. My client wishes to plead guilty to all charges." "Ms. Townsend, how do you plead to the charge of kidnapping in the first degree?" Saskia's voice was steady. "Guilty, Your Honor, and to the charge of attempted theft by fraud of the Caldwell family trust assets, valued at $4.2 million. Guilty. Identity theft and fraudulent impersonation. Guilty." Her eyes never left the judge. She didn't look at Margot sitting beside me in the gallery, didn't acknowledge Vernon and Phyllis Caldwell sitting 3 rows behind us, didn't search the courtroom for sympathy or forgiveness. Just stood there, spine straight, accepting responsibility for crimes that had begun long before she was born. Margot's hand found mine in the gallery, and I felt her trembling as she watched her mirror image accept guilt for trying to steal her existence. Judge Reynolds set down the file. "Mr. Webb, does the defense wish to present mitigating circumstances before sentencing?" "Yes, Your Honor." Webb approached the bench with a folder. "My client was given up for adoption at birth by Vernon and Phyllis Caldwell in 1985. She spent her childhood in the Texas foster system, moving between 7 homes before aging out at 18. She discovered she had an identical twin sister living a privileged life in Houston when she was 23, after obtaining her original birth certificate through the state registry." "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, "while we acknowledge Ms. Townsend's difficult background, this was a premeditated crime spanning multiple weeks. She researched her victim, planned the abduction, and attempted to steal millions of dollars. Childhood trauma does not excuse—" "I'm aware of the law, Ms. Brennan," Judge Reynolds said quietly. "Mr. Webb, continue." "The defense calls Vernon Caldwell to provide context." Vernon stood, his face ashen. At 68, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. Diminished. Haunted. He took the witness stand and swore to tell the truth. "Mr. Caldwell," Webb said, "in 1985 you and your wife had twin daughters. What happened?" Vernon's voice shook. "We were young, unmarried. My family had money and reputation. Twin daughters out of wedlock would have been. We decided to keep one and give the other up for adoption. We thought it would be easier." "Which daughter did you keep?" "Margot, the firstborn. We gave away Saskia." "Why?" "To protect ourselves." Vernon looked at Saskia for the first time. "We told everyone Phyllis has had one baby. Put Saskia up for adoption before the birth was even registered. Created a trust fund for Margot when she turned 5. We gave her everything and gave Saskia nothing." "And when did you learn Saskia had found you?" "When Detective Ramsey told us she'd kidnapped Margot." Vernon's voice broke. "We created this. Everything she did. The anger, the desperation, the crime. It started with us. We gave away our daughter to save our reputations. Everything Saskia did came from that original sin." Phyllis was crying in the gallery behind me. Margot's hand tightened on mine. "How do you sentence someone for crimes that began with being unwanted at birth?" Judge Reynolds looked at Saskia for a long moment. "Ms. Townsend, Mitigating circumstances do not excuse kidnapping, but this court recognizes the complex trauma involved. You committed serious crimes that endangered an innocent person. However, I also recognize that systemic injustice began those crimes long before you acted. She consulted her notes. I hereby sentence you to 12 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 8 years served. You will also be required to complete psychological counseling and participate in restorative justice programs. Saskia nodded once, accepting it. Ms. Townsend, you have the right to make a statement before sentencing is finalized. Do you wish to speak? For the first time, Saskia turned and looked directly at Margot. Identical faces across the courtroom. One in orange, one in gray. Both marked by the same cheekbones and eyes and mouth, separated by everything that mattered. Margot, Saskia said quietly. I'm sorry you were hurt. I'm sorry you were terrified. I'm sorry Bryce had to go through hell looking for you. Margot was crying silently beside me. But I'm not sorry for being angry, Saskia continued. I just wanted what should have been mine. The family, the trust, the life. You got it all by accident of birth order. I got nothing. Not because I was bad or wrong or unworthy, just because they chose you and threw me away. Identical faces, opposite lives, both crying. I don't expect you to forgive me, Saskia finished. I just wanted you to understand. I wasn't trying to steal your life. I was trying to claim the one I should have had. Judge Reynolds nodded to the bailiff. This court is adjourned. They led Saskia away in handcuffs, and Margot whispered, She's right. It should have been hers. Justice was served. The trust fund was secure. But sitting in that courtroom, I understood that some thefts happen at birth, and some wounds never fully heal. We had our life back, but Saskia never had hers to begin with. 2 weeks after sentencing, Margot told me she wanted to visit her sister in jail, and I knew better than to argue with the kind of grief that needs to look itself in the mirror. You don't have to do this, I said anyway, sitting across from her at our kitchen table on the morning of February 15th. She kidnapped you, terrorized you. You don't owe her anything, I know. Margot stared at her coffee, untouched and cooling. But she's my twin, my blood. And she's right. Everything she said in court was true. I got the life we should have shared. I need to understand what that did to her. Understanding won't change what happened. No, but maybe it'll help me live with it. So I drove her to the county jail, waited in the parking lot while she went inside, and tried not to think about the last time my wife had been locked behind doors I couldn't open. Margot told me later what happened in that visiting room. She sat in a plastic chair facing bulletproof glass, phone receiver in hand, waiting. Then Saskia appeared on the other side in orange scrubs, hair pulled back, face bare of makeup. They looked at each other for a long moment. Mirror images separated by crime and plexiglass and choices made 40 years ago. Margot picked up the phone first. I needed to understand what it was like for you, growing up knowing you'd been given away. Saskia's laugh was bitter. You want me to make you feel better about keeping everything I should have had? No, I want to know my sister, even if she hates me. That stopped Saskia. She sat down slowly, picked up her phone, studied Margot's face like she was searching for differences and finding none. What do you want to know? Saskia asked finally. Everything. The foster homes. How you found out about me. What you felt when you realized we were twins. Through the scratched plastic barrier, Saskia's hand mirrored Margot's on the other side. Identical hands that had lived opposite lives. Saskia talked for 20 minutes. 7 foster homes in 15 years. Families who took state money but gave nothing else. A middle school counselor who helped her access her birth records at 23, revealing she'd been born twin A, given away while twin B was kept. Finding Margot's social media, seeing photos of family dinners and vacation trips, and a husband who looked at her like she mattered. I watched you for months before I made the switch, Saskia said quietly. Followed you to work, to the grocery store, to Bryce's garage. I saw you laugh with him one afternoon. Just this easy, genuine joy. And I felt something break inside me. You had everything, love, family, money, and didn't even know how lucky you were. Margot was crying. You're right. I didn't know. I didn't know you existed. They stole that from both of us. They chose you and threw me away like I was disposable. I didn't ask them to. If I'd known, you'd have what? Shared the trust fund? Split the family? It doesn't work that way, Margot. There was only room for one daughter in Vernon and Phyllis's perfect life, and you got picked. I got nothing. Silence stretched between them. How do you forgive someone for wanting what should have been theirs from birth? I'm sorry, Saskia said finally, her voice breaking. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I made you afraid. I just wanted... I know. Margot pressed her palm against the glass. You wanted what should have been yours too. Saskia mirrored the gesture, palm to palm through the barrier. I can't take it back. No, but maybe we can be sisters anyway, after everything, despite everything. I don't know how. Me neither. But we have time to figure it out. When Margot came back to the car, she was exhausted and red-eyed, but calmer than I'd seen her in weeks. She told me everything during the drive home, her voice steady, processing aloud. She's not a monster, Margot said. She's a person who got destroyed by our parents' choice and made terrible decisions trying to fix it. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it helps me understand. I reached over, took her hand. How do you feel? Sad, angry, grateful, guilty, all of it at once. That's fair. We started therapy the next week with Dr. Harper, a 58-year-old trauma counselor recommended by the Victim Services Advocate at the DA's office. She worked out of a small office in Montrose, decorated with plants and soft lighting, the kind of space designed to feel safe. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, Dr. Harper told us during our first session on February 17th. You went through a major trauma, individually and as a couple. Healing takes time and intention. Margot talked about identity, how looking at Saskia felt like confronting an alternate version of herself, wondering if trauma could have made her capable of the same crimes. I talked about helplessness, about watching my wife disappear and being unable to protect her. Understanding isn't the same as excusing, Dr. Harper said gently. Margot, you're allowed to heal without carrying Saskia's pain. Bryce, you're allowed to be angry at what happened, even while supporting your wife's choice to connect with her sister. We rebuilt our life like repair work at the garage. Slow, careful, one piece at a time, trusting the foundation would hold. By late February, rhythm was returning. I was back at the garage full-time. Margot returned to work at the nonprofit, where she managed community outreach. We had dinner together every night, talked through the hard things, learned to sleep without nightmares. The trust fund transferred on February 23rd, exactly as planned. $4.2 million secured in Margot's name. But the real wealth was simpler. My wife alive, our marriage healing, and the knowledge that identity isn't just what you're given at birth, it's what you build with the people who choose to stay. Saskia would serve her time. We would build our future. And somewhere in between, two sisters would carry the weight of one family's original sin. 3 weeks after the trust fund transferred, I woke at 2 a.m. and watched my wife sleep. And this time, finally, I knew for certain it was her. The bedroom was dark except for streetlight filtering through our curtains, casting soft shadows across Margot's face. She was curled on her left side, facing my half of the bed, the way she always did, one hand tucked under her pillow. Her breathing was steady, 4 counts in, 6 counts out, the rhythm I'd memorized over 12 years of marriage. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No mysterious calls, no strangers claiming to be my wife. Just the quiet hum of our house settling and the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside. I'd woken like this before, that terrible morning in January when everything started. Watched her sleep and felt the first creeping tendrils of doubt. But tonight, there was only certainty. The scar on her left wrist, small, faded white, shaped like a comma, caught the streetlight through our window, and I breathed easier. She'd told me that story on our 3rd date, laughing about falling off her bike at 8 years old, trying to impress the neighborhood boys. Saskia wouldn't have known that detail, couldn't have faked the exact placement. The texture of old tissue turned smooth with time. I traced the geography of my wife in the dark. The small mole behind her right ear, the way her hair fell across her face when she slept, the callus on her left thumb from years of gripping pens at the non-profit office. Every detail was correct because every detail was real. Saskia had been good. Studied her twin, memorized mannerisms, faked affection. But she couldn't replicate 12 years of shared mornings and whispered conversations and ordinary love accumulated day by day. She'd worn Margot's face and voice like a costume, but the small truths underneath, those belonged only to the woman sleeping beside me. We'd spent the past month rebuilding what the kidnapping had fractured. Therapy twice a week with Dr. Harper, working through trust and trauma. Margot had nightmares sometimes, woke up gasping about locked rooms and her sister's face in the mirror. I had my own dreams where I searched warehouses forever, finding empty chairs and lipstick messages that led nowhere. But we were healing, slowly, together. Yesterday afternoon, Margot had come home from a doctor's appointment and found me in the garage, bent over the engine of a '68 Mustang that needed a full rebuild. She'd stood in the doorway until I noticed her, wiping grease from my hands with a rag, reading something complicated in her expression. "I'm pregnant," she'd said quietly. 8 weeks. I'm scared to hope, but I want to try. I'd frozen, rag still in hand, processing. The miscarriage that started all of this had happened just months ago, in the worst week of our lives. Margot had been devastated, and we'd agreed to wait, to heal, to try again, when the grief wasn't so raw. Then Saskia had weaponized that loss, used it to convince me she was Margot, played on the exact pain we'd been nursing privately. "A baby. After everything, a baby. We'll be careful," I'd said, crossing the garage to pull her into my arms despite the grease staining my shirt. "We'll do it together. This time is different. Everything is different now," she'd whispered against my chest. "We know what we almost lost." Lying in bed now, watching her sleep with our child growing inside her, I felt the weight of that truth. We'd almost lost everything. Our marriage, our trust, her life. Saskia had come so close to stealing it all. Not just the money or identity, but the small accumulated intimacy that made us a family. But we'd survived. And now we were choosing hope over fear, building forward instead of looking back. Dawn broke slowly, gray light replacing the street lamp's yellow glow. Margot stirred, eyelids fluttering, and found me watching her. She smiled, soft, unguarded, the smile that had made me fall in love with her all those years ago. "You were watching me sleep again," she murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Yeah, but this time I wasn't wondering who you were." "Good, because I'm exactly who I've always been, just more grateful you noticed." She sat up, stretched, padded barefoot into the kitchen. I followed, leaning against the doorframe while she made coffee. 2 sugars, dash of cinnamon, poured into the chipped blue mug we'd bought on our honeymoon in Galveston. She'd made coffee this exact way for 12 years. Saskia had gotten it wrong, used the wrong mug, forgotten the cinnamon, poured before the sugar dissolved properly. Small things, but love lived in small things. She made coffee the way she always had, and watching her I understood that love isn't about perfect certainty. It's about choosing to trust the small rituals that make a life. "Come here," I said, and she crossed the kitchen to me, coffee steaming between us. I held her carefully, feeling her heartbeat against my chest, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and morning and home. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach where our future was growing, one cell division at a time. "I love you," she said simply. "I know, I love you too." No grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just truth, spoken in our kitchen on a Thursday morning in late February, ordinary and irreplaceable. Standing in our kitchen as February dawn broke over Houston, watching the woman I'd almost lost make coffee with cinnamon, the way she'd done for 12 years, I finally understood what Saskia had tried to steal. Not money or identity or even family. She'd wanted the simple right to be known. Margot had that. I had that. And the child growing inside her would have it too. This time I knew for certain it was her. No more secrets. No more doubt. Just us, choosing each other, one morning at a time. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I almost lost everything because I ignored the small signs that something was wrong. I watched my wife make coffee differently, act strangely, and I pushed down my doubts because I didn't want to believe the impossible. Don't make my mistake. Trust your instincts when the people you love start feeling like strangers. The details matter. The small rituals of a life together matter. What started as a revenge story against my family became a lesson about identity, trust, and forgiveness. Saskia's revenge story was rooted in a real injustice. She was abandoned at birth while her twin got everything. But revenge never heals the original wound. It only creates more victims. I believe God put us through this nightmare to teach us what truly matters, not money or status, but knowing and being known by the people we love. Margot came back to me when I'd almost given up hope, and we're building our future on truth this time. What would you have done in my situation? Trusted your instincts or convinced yourself everything was fine? Drop a comment and let me know. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more true stories about family, betrayal, and survival, subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know this wasn't an easy story to hear, but I hope the message reached you. Remember, some details have been adjusted for storytelling purposes, but the core lesson about trust, identity, and the small